So this is one of the Singer sewing machines that we have here in the clean space at Spalding. They're both basically the same machine. This part might look a little different, but everything's laid out in the same spot. So you have your needle position, which is either center, right, or left. I like to keep it in the center, but this has to do with if you're, depending on what side you're trying to put your stitch, and if you're trying to work really close to an edge, you can adjust that. And you can see the needle move around when you move that. The stitch width, if you're doing a straight stitch, obviously you want it all the way to the left. As you go to the right, the stitch gets wider. Then you have stitch length over here, which is the dial. So right now it's set to 5. Which is the longest stitch. So if I put it all the way over to the zigzag, it would make a really wide zigzag where the points of each triangle were far apart. If I wanted to, say, repair a hole in a pair of jeans or something like that, I would set it to this widest setting, but I would make the stitch length the shortest so that it would be a very tight zigzag. So I'm going to set this in the middle here. This is the tensioner. You can see that it suggests that you keep it between 2 and 5. So when you're sewing, it's a good idea to just keep it in that middle range, unless you're sewing something strange, and then you'll have to play with the tension. Certain materials prefer to have high tension, some have low, so it's just something that you can mess around with, and you can, even if you're using an unusual type of material, like if you're trying to sew plastic or vinyl or leather or something that's really thin and stretchy, then I would Google it and find out how much, find out what's the best tension. All machines have these functions for the most part. A couple other things that I'll point out. First of all, machines usually have a bobbin in 2 different positions. This has the kind of bobbin that lays flat. So this is your bobbin here, and this uses plastic bobbins. You always want the thread coming around on the bobbin clockwise, right? You don't want it coming this way. You want it to come around from the left over the top, okay? And then to put the bobbin in this machine, you basically lay it right down in there, and there's a little notch, and you can kind of feel the thread. Oh, I broke it. Okay, let's try that again. What you want to do is you want to kind of lay that thread across inside this notch right here. And I'll try to take a close-up of that, if not on this machine, on another one. Now let's talk about threading this machine. So you always have your spool of thread up here, and this machine has a little cap to keep it on. And basically what you want to do is make sure that the cap is like this. If you have it like this, that can hang up your thread. The other thing that I always have problems with is spools of thread have a little notch where you can sort of tuck the thread behind. You can see it right here. There's that little notch that keeps the thread from unspooling when you're not using the spool. And then of course this one's cracked. But I always find that notch on my thread, and then I make sure I put it to the right. That way when my thread is coming off the spool, there's no chance of it getting hooked in there, because if it gets hooked in there, the whole thing stops. So you put your thread, and you want to make sure that this rod back here in the back of the machine goes through the center hole of the spool of thread, not through one of the other weird holes. So, through there. Then you've got this little plastic thing in the background, and I'll do some close-ups of these, and that you go under it and then around, and if you look closely, you can usually tell which way the thread is supposed to go. Almost every machine is the same and has some sort of post back here on the back and the top. Then you have this little metal bit here, and so you go under it and bring it around so that you go down in through that little notch. That keeps it in place. This round part is for when you wind the bobbin. And you go down under the tensioner, and then you've got to get a hold of this arm. So a lot of the times when you're working, what you have to do is you have to turn the machine until that arm comes out a little bit, and then you can slip the thread through there. And the way this works is you slip the thread down and then you pull it back, and it finds the notch, and it's inside that little arm. After that, you come down here and you go twice around there until you're inside that little loop. You go through the little piece of metal that keeps the thread by the top of the needle, and then the last thing you do is you thread the needle. So I'm over at the Squala Studios now, and here's a different kind of sewing machine. This one threads basically the same way as the one that's in the clean space at Spalding. And the reason I say that is because the bobbin lays flat in front of the needle. So the principle is the same here. You come off the spool, you go around that little plastic arm, you come around this silver fitting here, then you go down around the tensioner and up over the rocker arm there. And then there's this little twice around, it even tells you with the arrow. You go behind the wire under the needle there, and then the last thing you do is you thread the needle. And I usually can't thread a needle unless I cut it. I also have a really hard time seeing the hole in the needle anymore. I need to put on my giant glasses. And once you get the needle threaded, one important thing is to make sure it doesn't get knotted up. Because if it gets in a knot there, you might not notice, but that will bungle up. See that? It's all twisted. So I need to get that twist out of my thread. There. So now it comes straight down through this hook, through the needle. Now I want to put it behind this metal guard, and then the last thing I want to do is put it inside of the foot, and the easiest way to keep it there is to put it out the back of the machine. Once the needle is threaded, you're going to put the bobbin in. So as I said before, you want the thread to come around over the top. You put that down inside the machine, and then if you see this little notch right here, you put the thread in that notch and see how it actually goes underneath this little silver bit here, and then it lays across this path right here. And then the way that you know that that worked is you hold the thread that's coming through the needle here. So you're coming through the needle under the foot, and then you manually advance the needle down. See everything turning? The needle's going to go down in there, and it's going to pick up the bobbin thread. It comes back up, and it has the bobbin thread in a loop. See it? Right here. Watch that thread. Now it's going to pull this thread up through the machine, and now both threads are under the foot. And now I'm going to put that back in place, and I should be able to sew a piece of fabric. So before I start working on my workpiece, when I'm sewing, after I've threaded the needle, I want to check it to make sure that everything's functioning. So I just take a piece of scrap fabric, set it in there, and I tend to hold the two threads the first time so that I can feel if anything's going weird, and so they just don't come slipping out. So I'm going to do a zigzag stitch. Yeah, I'm going to do a zigzag stitch to really test it here. Go backwards. That looks pretty good. Tight stitch. It looks normal on both sides. It's not all bungled up on the bottom. Here's a fun tip. Most sewing machines, on the back side of the arm that the foot is attached to, have a thread cutter. It was years before I realized that. So this bobbin is pretty full. It's got enough thread on it. What happens when your bobbin runs out? Because of course you have the spool of thread, and then you have the bobbin inside the machine, and the bobbin will run out typically before the spool does. So you oftentimes have to rewind the bobbin, put more thread on the bobbin. Most sewing machines operate like this. You have to unthread the machine, which is kind of the bummer of it, but this is how you get good at threading. Then you're going to go around this thing in a little bit different way. Instead of going around it like that, you're just going to go around this top notch right here, and then you're going to go around this little wheel. And then what you're going to do is you're going to put the bobbin on this little silver tab here, and you're going to start it. So I'll wind it around a little bit so that I know it's going to catch. Now you have to know which way the bobbin's going to turn. They almost always turn clockwise. Then the last thing you're going to do is loosen the knob where you hand turn. This one, and I think the two machines, it's Balding and this machine, have just a little push switch. So when you push that in on the side, that disengages the foot so that all you're doing is spinning this and the foot of the machine isn't running up and down. Then you can use the foot pedal to wind the bobbin. Now, just like when you're sewing with the machine, the faster that you do it, the faster the bobbin winds. And what you want to do is make sure that the thread goes up and down in a nice even. You want to make sure that it doesn't slip underneath. I've had that happen before where the thread suddenly slips under the bobbin and then it gets all wound up inside the machine. Now, at some point, it'll shut off by itself. That's what this is for. See that? Now it's rubbing, so I know it's finished. So now, I can snap that, put that back in place, and then I would just cut that and put that in the machine. I have to rethread the whole machine and start over. This is a different machine, obviously. This is a White. It's a good sewing machine. White makes a good sewing machine. It's a good brand. It's an all-steel machine. And the difference between the last two machines that I've showed you and this one is that the bobbin is straight up and down rather than laying flat. And because of that, it has what's called a bobbin holder, which is different. It's a little silver thing. So I'm going to show you how to thread this machine. A lot of it's the same. This does have two different positions for your thread. It still has the same function with the bobbin winder, and you'd come around that little wheel and go to the bobbin to wind your bobbin. It does not have the push switch on the side, so you have to loosen the knob on the inside of the turn wheel here. But to thread this machine, turn on the light. There. So to thread this machine, I'm going to go around that silver piece right there. The tensioner's up higher on this one. This is the tensioner, so I'm going to go through the tensioner and then down underneath this silver fitting. And then the rocker arm is right there. So I have to come up and catch that. So I come up in between, come down around this, up on the right of it. I catch the little opening there, and now I'm coming down to the left. And then I come down, there's a thread holder down here above the needle that I have to get into. And this is a common one to miss. If you miss this thread holder here, and your thread goes straight from here down to the needle, that can sometimes mess up your sewing. And then I'm going to thread it, thread the needle, all right, and put it under the foot. All right, so my thread comes around there, past the tensioner, down around this, up over the rocker arm, back down, catches here, goes through the needle, goes in the hole of the foot and is under the foot going back off the bottom plate. Now, for the bobbin holder, I should have wound her bobbin for her. I'll do that in a minute. So, for the bobbin holder, same thing. The thread comes over the top clockwise. Hold that in your hand, and then you hold the bobbin holder and see it has this funny little set of metal tabs. So there's a notch. You can see where the thread goes. So you put the bobbin holder in the bobbin in the bobbin holder, thread is coming around clockwise, and that's the direction of the notch, so it reminds you. So you go in the notch and then you pull it back until it is loose in that little plate. You want the bobbin to spin in there, right? If it's not spinning, it's stuck. Then you turn the whole thing around. This little claw should be sticking up. And all you do is you can use this. See, it has this little spring-loaded thing, and that's just to put the bobbin holder in and out. You can hold that, take the whole contraption, and you stand it up in there, and it'll click in place. You'll know when it's in there. should stay put. Then once it's in there, you do the same thing you did with the other machine. You hold the thread that's coming down through the needle, you hand crank the machine, and you're going to see the whole thing spin, and you're going to see that thread. Now if it catches a little or it's funny, just keep turning it until the bobbin thread comes out the top, and then you just lace it through. And then once you have both threads, so you have two threads here, right? You have the thread that's coming from the spool and comes down through the needle, and you have the thread that's coming up from the bobbin. And then once you have them both under the foot, you can close that, and again, you're ready to sew. Let's make sure it worked. Put the foot down. Now this reverse is in a different spot. It's here instead of the push button like the last machine. This one you lift up. Or down, sorry. Looking pretty good. All right. Here's an old sewing machine. I would bet you this sewing machine is maybe 110 years old. This was given to us, and I was afraid to use it for a long time. It has a big external motor on it, and you actually wind the bobbin over here on this gear. It's a belt driven, so the motor's down beneath the desk and there's a belt. Now this machine doesn't do so many of the things that the other machines do. It doesn't really go reverse, it won't reverse, and the tensioner is here and is pretty tough to adjust. So why do I like this machine? Well, actually this is the tensioner. The reason that I like this machine is because it is so exceptionally heavy duty. This machine will sew through just about anything. I've sewn through inch-thick foam and upholstery with this machine making puppets. Now the trouble is that means that it'll also sew right through your fingers, so you have to be very careful. But this machine, the reason I wanted to show this machine to you is because it threads pretty much the same as any other machine. You have the spool, your thread comes off the spool, it goes through this little holder here, which actually just sits in there, which is kind of funny. So, go through that, and I imagine you could move it there too if you wanted. And then, this one, there's this little L-shaped metal hook here, and it just goes through one hole and then back out the other, and this just manages the direction of the thread. Once you have it going through there, then it goes around the tensioner here. This is the tensioner, and there's a little metal wire here, and all you have to do is get behind that, and then you can understand how it tensions, because when you pull down on it, you see it move. Then it goes under this hook right here, and then it goes up through the rocker arm, which is a little strange. The first time I did this, I thought it was a little strange because the rocker arm almost seems to be to the right of this, but it works. So if it works, that's how it's supposed to be done. And then there's a thread holder here on the side, little metal loop. Just barely get the thread through there. There's another one here. So again, mostly the same rhythm, the same points. And then lastly, we've got to thread it through our needle. There's also a thread catcher down here right at the top of the needle. And then one thing that's unusual about this machine is that it threads, the needle threads sideways instead of front to back. So I believe that it should go in right to left. And I say that because there's a notch in the needle, and because the foot is slightly longer on the left, and because most people were right-handed, so they would put it in with their right hand. Now, the bobbin on this machine is down here, and even though this plate is horizontal, the bobbin holder is a vertical bobbin holder. So here's the bobbin. Now, something you need to know about these bobbin holders, they are specific to the machine. Some bobbin holders are thicker this way, or thinner, or bigger around, so you have to be sure that you have the right bobbin and the right bobbin holder for the machine that you're using. If you ever try to use a machine and it just sounds terrible and is rattling and sounding crazy, it's probably because you have the wrong size bobbin or bobbin holder in there. But this works the same. Thread comes around clockwise over the top. Bobbin holder, looking at it from the back, put the bobbin in. You put the thread up in that little notch and behind the plate until it's in there loose. And my hand isn't small enough to, I just do this from underneath, so I can stick my hand underneath the machine and it's all the same. Clicks in place, and then I manually push this forward until it brings that thread up. And now both threads are coming out. Let's see if it'll work. Foot down, holding the thread, belt slipping. Yeah. Oh, I broke my thread. You know what happened? It got stuck in the tensioner.